The moonlight paints silver streaks across Iron Bottom Sound as Lieutenant Lester Gamble cuts his engines to idle. It's a 1 hours on December 12, 1942 off the northwest coast of Guadalcanal. His PT-37 rocks gently in the current. A 77-foot plywood boat armed with 4 torpedoes and a prayer. Behind him, PT-40 and PT-48 drift silently in the darkness. Their 12-man crews scanning the horizon with binoculars that fog in the tropical night. For 6 months, the Tokyo Express has been bleeding American forces dry. Every night, Japanese destroyers thunder down the slot, delivering tons of supplies to their trapped garrison on Guadalcanal. Every night, American sailors die trying to stop them. The statistics are brutal. In the past month alone, the U.S. Navy has lost 3 cruisers and 7 destroyers in these waters. 42 points boats have deployed to the Solomon Islands. 18 will never return home. What Gamble doesn't know as shadows materialize on the horizon is that he's looking at Rear Admiral Rizo Tanaka's flagship, the brand new destroyer Teruzuki, bristling with the most advanced rapid-fire guns in the Imperial Japanese Navy. She's already sent 3 American destroyers to the bottom. Her fire control systems can track and destroy aircraft at night. Her hull displaces 2,700 tons. PT-37 weighs 56 tons. Fully loaded, Gamble's crew watches the destroyer formation steam closer. 800 yards, 700. His hand hovers over the throttle. Standard doctrine says fire at 1,000 yards and run. But something's different tonight. One destroyer has broken formation, steaming parallel to shore, isolated from her sisters. Vulnerable 600 yards, Gamble's helmsman whispers a question. The skipper shakes his head. Not yet. 500 yards. What Lester Gamble doesn't know is that in the next 3 minutes, his tiny plywood boat will change the course of the Guadalcanal campaign. He doesn't know that he's about to sink the largest warship ever destroyed by a PT boat in combat. He doesn't know that his actions tonight will end the career of Japan's most decorated destroyer commander and force the Imperial Japanese Army to begin evacuating Guadalcanal. All he knows is that the massive steel shadow passing before him represents 6 months of American defeat. And tonight that ends. To understand why 12 sailors in a plywood boat are about to charge a destroyer, you have to go back to August 7, 1942, the day Marines landed on Guadalcanal, and everything started going wrong. The island was supposed to fall in 48 hours. Instead, it became a 6-month bloodbath. The problem wasn't the daytime. American air power from Henderson Field controlled the daylight hours. The problem was the night. Every single night, Japanese destroyers raced down the New Georgia Sound, a 70-mile corridor the sailors called the Slot, delivering reinforcements and supplies to their besieged garrison. The Americans called these runs the Tokyo Express. The Japanese called them rat runs. By November 1942, they'd completed over 60 successful resupply missions. The U.S. Navy tried everything to stop them. They sent cruiser task forces. At the First Battle of Zavo Island on August 9, Japanese destroyers sank 4 Allied cruisers in 32 minutes without losing a single ship. They tried again at Cape Esperance in October. At the Naval Battle of Guadalcanal in November, they threw battleships into the fight. The USS South Dakota took 42 direct hits. The USS Juneau went down with all but 10 of her 687 crew. One of the dead was Ol Sullivan. So were his 4 brothers, all stationed on the same ship. Admiral Chester Nimitz was desperate. The chiefs of staff in Washington were talking about evacuation. 6 months of fighting and the Imperial Japanese Navy still owned the night. Every conventional solution had failed. Every attempt to stop the Tokyo Express with traditional naval forces resulted in catastrophic American losses. That's when someone remembered the PT boats. Motor torpedo boats had arrived at Tulagi in October 1942. A squadron of 8 plywood vessels that most naval officers considered glorified speedboats. They were 77 feet long, powered by 3 Packard V12 engines that produced 4,100 horsepower, top speed 41 knots. Armament, 4 Mark 8 torpedoes, twin 50 caliber machine guns, and whatever else the crews could bolt on. Armor none, protection, none, radar, primitive at best. The expert consensus was unanimous. PT boats were suicide machines. Captain Morton Mamar, overseeing PT operations, wrote in his after-action report that motor torpedo boats are not suitable for attacks on heavily armed warships. The Office of Naval Intelligence agreed. Their tactical manual stated explicitly, PT boats will not engage destroyers except under circumstances of extreme tactical advantage. The boat's plywood hulls couldn't stop anything larger than rifle rounds. A single 5 inches shell would blow them to splinters. Their torpedoes were unreliable, running too deep, circling back, or simply failing to detonate. But Admiral William Hawley had run out of options. The Tokyo Express was delivering 1,500 tons of supplies per run. The Marines on Guadalcanal were down to 2 meals a day. Henderson Field was taking nightly bombardment from Japanese battleships. If the supply line wasn't cut, Guadalcanal would fall. And if Guadalcanal fell, the road to Australia lay wide open. Hawley gave the PT squadrons their orders in late November. Stop the Tokyo Express or die trying. The stakes couldn't be higher. Intelligence estimated 30,000 Japanese troops still fighting on Guadalcanal, slowly starving, but still deadly. Every supply run extended the campaign. Every bag of rice delivered meant another week of fighting. Another 100 Marines dead. The PT boat skippers read their orders and knew the truth. They were being asked to charge destroyers, warships that outweighed them 50 to 1 and outgunned them 100 to 1. Standard tactics called for high-speed hit-and-run attacks from maximum range, firing torpedoes blindly into the darkness and praying something connected. The success rate for PT boat torpedo attacks against destroyers stood at 4%. Those were the odds Lester Gamble faced as shadows materialized on his horizon on the night of December 11, 1942. Lieutenant Lester Henry Gamble should never have been commanding PT-37 that night. He wasn't a Naval Academy graduate. He wasn't even a career officer. 6 months earlier, he'd been selling insurance in Oakland, California. Gamble was 26 years old, a reserve officer commissioned through the Navy V-7 program, 90 days of training, and straight to the fleet. He'd requested submarine duty. The Navy sent him to Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 2 instead, handing him command of PT-37 with exactly 14 days of tactical training. His crew was even greener. The average age was 22. Most had never seen combat. Their torpedo man had been a grocery clerk. Their radar operator had been studying engineering at UCLA. This was the pattern across the PT squadrons, young lieutenants and ensigns commanding crews of teenagers in boats that cost $150,000 each and lasted an average of 6 months in combat. The experienced destroyer captains looked at them with pity. The cruiser admirals didn't look at them at all. But Gamble had something the brass didn't account for. He was willing to break every rule they'd written. Throughout November 1942, Gamble studied the Tokyo Express patterns obsessively. He noticed something the tactical manuals missed. The Japanese destroyers always hugged the Guadalcanal coastline on their return runs, using the island's radar shadow for concealment. They maintained tight formation for mutual defense, except for one ship that always ran close to shore, acting as a forward scout. That scout destroyer ran alone, isolated, vulnerable. The tactical doctrine said, engage at 1,000 yards. Gamble started calculating what would happen at 500 yards. At 300, the manual said, fire and flee. Gamble started thinking about what would happen if you fired and stayed, closing to point-blank range where the destroyer's big guns couldn't depress low enough to target you. His fellow skippers thought he was insane. His executive officer, Lieutenant Robert Searles, told him directly, that's suicide, Les. They'll blow us out of the water. Gamble pulled out his compass and charts. He'd found something else the manuals didn't mention. The Guadalcanal coastline created a blind spot. If you positioned your boat against the dark island mass and cut your engines, you became invisible to Japanese lookouts scanning from seaward. You could let them steam right past you, you could wait until they were so close you couldn't miss. At 300 yards, even the PT boat's notoriously unreliable Mark 8 torpedoes would find their target. His squadron commander, Lieutenant Commander Alan Montgomery, listened to Gamble's proposal and shook his head. You understand what you're suggesting? You'll be inside their secondary battery range. If they spot you before you fire, you won't have time to run. Gamble understood perfectly. He'd watched the Tokyo Express run unopposed for 2 months. He'd seen the Marine casualties coming back from Guadalcanal. Men with 1,000-yard stares and malaria shakes. He'd attended memorial services for PT crews who'd followed the tactical manual and died anyway. Following doctrine had a 4% success rate. Gamble decided to write his own doctrine. On December 7, he pitched his plan to Montgomery. The commander studied the charts, checked the moon tables, and finally nodded. One chance, Lieutenant. Don't waste it. Gamble didn't plan to. The preparation happens in darkness on Targai's makeshift PT boat base, a collection of Quonset huts and floating pontoon docks that the CBS carved from jungle 3 months earlier. It's December 10, 1942, 36 hours before Gamble's planned ambush. This isn't exactly a secret workshop. There isn't enough secrecy or space in the South Pacific for that. But what Gamble is planning might as well be forbidden. He's about to violate every tactical doctrine written for PT boat operations. His executive officer, Bob Searles, spreads charts across PT-37's tiny chart table. They're calculating approach vectors accounting for current moonlight and the speed of Japanese destroyers at 28 knots. Gamble draws a position marker 200 yards off to Kafaranga Point. Searles sees it and goes pale. That's inside their searchlight range. That's the point, Gamble replies. They can't search what they can't see. We'll be invisible against the island. The crucial innovation isn't technological. It's psychological. Every PT boat doctrine assumes you attack from seaward, matching speed with the enemy, firing at maximum range and running at 40 knots to escape retaliation. Gamble's plan does the opposite. Position against the coastline. Cut engines completely. Wait in silent ambush. Let the enemy come to you. Fire at point-blank range. Stilly Taylor, commanding PT-40, joins the planning session. He looks at Gamble's calculations and whistles low. You're going to hold position until they're 300 yards out. Closer if possible, Gamble confirms. Bill Cryer from PT-48 arrives next. His concern is practical. What if our torpedoes malfunction? We'll be sitting ducks. It's a legitimate fear. The Mark 8 torpedoes are notorious. They run too deep. Their magnetic exploders detonate prematurely. Their depth settings fail. The failure rate approaches 30%. Gamble pulls out maintenance logs. He's been studying them obsessively. The torpedoes fail at long range because crews fire them blindly into darkness at targets they barely see, guessing at speed and bearing. At 300 yards, you don't guess, you aim. Gentlemen, at 300 yards, even a drunk torpedo will hit. The first crude test happens the next night, December 11th, during a routine patrol. Gamble positions PT-37 against Guadalcanal's coastline and cuts engines. He orders absolute silence. No smoking, no unnecessary movement, no radio chatter. The crew sits in darkness, listening to waves lap against their plywood hull. A Japanese float plane passes overhead. Searchlights sweeping the water. It passes within a 4 mile and never spots them. The tactic works. But when Montgomery learns what Gamble did, the squadron commander's reaction is immediate. That is completely insane. You're violating every principle of motor torpedo boat warfare. Sir, every principle of motor torpedo boat warfare has a 4% success rate. Montgomery stares at his impedent lieutenant. He should shut this down immediately. He should relieve Gamble of command for violating doctrine. He should write this up as a court-martial offense. Instead, he looks at the casualty report stacked on his desk, at the intelligence summary showing another Tokyo Express run scheduled for tonight, at the desperate message from Admiral Holly demanding results. Montgomery makes his decision. You've got one shot, Gamble. Make it count. And if this works, I'm taking credit for approving your crazy plan. Gamble grins. If this works, sir, you can have all the credit you want. The confrontation comes at Awa Fim hours December 12, 1942 in the waters off Guadalcanal's Tasafuranga Point. Lester Gamble has been sitting in silent ambush for 93 minutes. His legs are cramping. His crew is exhausted from maintaining absolute quiet. PT-40 and PT-48 drift somewhere to his right. He can't see them anymore. Separated by current and darkness, then the shadows appear. Gamble counts them through his binoculars. 11 destroyers in line formation returning from their supply run to Guadalcanal. They're making 28 knots. Wakes glowing with phosphorescence in the moonlight. Behind them, 6 of the destroyers are riding low in the water, their decks still stacked with empty supply drums they haven't had time to jettison. And there, exactly as Gamble predicted, one destroyer has broken formation. She's running parallel to the coastline, 500 yards ahead of the main formation, a scout ship, isolated. Through his binoculars, Gamble can see her pagoda-style superstructure. She's big, probably a flagship. Intelligence reports have mentioned a new Akizuki-class destroyer operating in the area, brand new, bristling with the advanced fire control systems, the Teruzuki, 400 yards and closing. In the pilot house of the Teruzuki, Rear Admiral Rizo Tanaka is exhausted. This is his 53rd Tokyo Express run. He's the most decorated destroyer commander in the Imperial Japanese Navy. A veteran of every major engagement from Pearl Harbor forward. 2 weeks ago, he pulled off a tactical masterpiece at the Battle of Tasaranga, sinking 1 American heavy cruiser and crippling 3 more without losing a single ship. He's earned the nickname Tenacious Tanaka. Tonight, he just wants to get home. His ships are loaded with wounded soldiers from Guadalcanal. His crews haven't slept in 36 hours. Intelligence reported American PT boats in the area, but Tanaka isn't worried. PT boats are nuisances, fast mosquitoes that fire torpedoes blindly from maximum range and run. His crews can handle mosquitoes 300 yards. On PT-37, Gamble's torpedo officer, Ensign Martin Totten, whispers urgently, "Skipper, we need to fire. We need to fire now." "Hold." Gamble breathes back. 250 yards. The Teruzuki's bridge watch should spot them. At this range, lookouts should see PT-37's silhouette. But Gamble positioned perfectly. His boat sits in the radar shadow of Guadalcanal, his hull blending into the dark landmass behind him. The Japanese lookouts are scanning seaward, expecting attack from open water. No one is looking at the island. 200 yards, torpedoes ready, Totten whispers. Gamble takes a breath. Everything depends on the next 10 seconds. If the Teruzuki spots them before they fire, her 5-inch guns will tear PT-37 apart before they can launch. If the torpedoes malfunction, they're dead. If the aim is off, they're dead. "Fire torpedoes," Gamble orders. All tubes. The compressed air hisses. 4 Mark 8 torpedoes splash into the water, their engines whining to life. Gamble slams his throttles forward. All 3 Packard engines roar to full power. 4,100 horsepower, screaming through exhausts. PT-37 leaps forward, her bow rising as she accelerates to 40 knots. On the Teruzuki's bridge, a lookout screams a warning, but it's already too late. 30 seconds after launch, one of Gamble's torpedoes slams into the Teruzuki's stern. The explosion is tremendous. 600 pounds of torpex detonating against thin destroyer plating. The blast tears open her aft hull, destroying her steering mechanism and igniting fuel oil. Flames leap 100 feet into the air, illuminating the entire Japanese formation. Around PT-37, the night erupts with gunfire. PT-40 and PT-48 have seized the moment. Both boats charging in and launching their own torpedoes at the burning flagship. Japanese destroyers wheel in confusion, their searchlights crisscrossing the water, trying to find the attackers. 5-inch shells whistle overhead, but Gamble's boats are too small, too fast, and too close to the coastline. The Japanese gun directors can't get a firing solution. Aboard the Teruzuki, Admiral Tanaka regains consciousness on the deck, thrown there by the explosion. His flagship is dying beneath him. Fire has reached the aft powder magazines. He shouts orders to abandon ship, but his voice is lost in the chaos. The destroyer Naganami pulls alongside to take him off. Sailors physically carrying the Admiral's limp body across. At 0440 hours, after 3 hours of firefighting, Captaino Arita gives the final order. The Kingston valves open. The Teruzuki slips beneath the waves, taking 160 men with her in the pilot house of PT-37, racing back to Tulagi. Lester Gamble doesn't know he's just sunk a flagship. He doesn't know he's ended Tanaka's career. He doesn't know that 3 months later, the Japanese will begin evacuating Guadalcanal. All he knows is that for the first time in 6 months, the Tokyo Express has been stopped. If you're finding this story as incredible as I did researching it, hit that subscribe button. These unknown moments from World War II deserve to be remembered, and this channel is dedicated to bringing them to light. Now, let's see what happened when the brass found out what Gamble had done. Commander Alan Montgomery reads Gamble's after-action report in his Tulagi office the next morning and immediately reaches for his radio. The report claims PT-37 sank a Japanese destroyer at point-blank range using an ambush tactic that violates every principle of naval warfare. Montgomery needs confirmation before this goes up the chain of command. Within hours, radio intercepts from Australian coast watchers confirm it. A Japanese destroyer definitely went down off Tassaparanga. Survivors are swimming to shore. The Tokyo Express force retreated without completing their supply run. Montgomery calls an emergency meeting of all PT squadron commanders. The room is packed. 16 lieutenant commanders and captains, plus representatives from Admiral Halley's staff. Montgomery has Gamble present his tactic. Silent ambush, point-blank range, fire from coastal concealment. The room erupts. Captain Thomas Schock from the cruiser force stands immediately. This is reckless in the extreme. You're advocating that PT boats position themselves inside secondary battery range of enemy destroyers. That's a court-martial offense waiting to happen. Commander Robert Kelly, commanding PT Squadron 3, agrees. The tactical manual exists for a reason. PT boats engage at maximum range and withdraw. What you're describing is suicide. But then Lieutenant Robert Searle stands Gamble's executive officer who initially called the plan crazy. Sir, with respect, the tactical manual has got an 18 points boat sunk in 2 months. Gamble's tactic just sank the largest warship any PT boat has ever destroyed. The only suicide is doing the same thing and expecting different results. The argument rages for 40 minutes. The conservative faction demands Gamble's relief. The younger officers demand the tactic be taught service-wide. Montgomery sits silently, letting them fight it out. Finally, a radio message arrives from Admiral Holly himself, monitoring the debate remotely. Evaluate results, not methods. Stop. Gamble achieved what entire cruiser force could not stop. Implement his tactics. Immediately stop. The room goes silent. Montgomery looks at Gamble. Congratulations, Lieutenant. You just rewrote the playbook. Now teach everyone else how to not get killed doing it. Over the next 2 weeks, Gamble trains every PT boat crew in the South Pacific on his ambush tactic. The results are immediate. On December 31st, using Gamble's method, PT boats intercept another Tokyo Express run and sink a transport ship. On January 10th, they damage 2 destroyers. The Tokyo Express runs become sporadic, then rare, then finally stop altogether. By February 1943, Japanese High Command orders, Operation K, the evacuation of Guadalcanal, the island that was supposed to fall in 48 hours, has become untenable after 6 months, in large part because one insurance salesman from Oakland figured out how to turn plywood boats into destroyer killers. The testing data tells the story in stark numbers. Before Gamble's tactic, PT boats achieved a 4% hit rate on torpedo attacks against Japanese warships. After implementation of the ambush doctrine, the hit rate climbed to 23%, nearly 6 times more effective. Between December 1942 and June 1943, PT boats using Gamble's method sank or damaged 42 Japanese vessels in the Solomon Islands theater. But numbers on paper don't convey what it felt like to be there. For that, you need the combat reports. January 23, 1943. Blackett Strait. Lieutenant Henry Stilly Taylor commands PT-40. Positioned in silent ambush using Gamble's technique. At 0243 hours, 4 Japanese destroyers thunder past his position. Taylor waits until the trailing destroyer is 300 yards out, then fires all 4 torpedoes. 2 strike home. The destroyer Hatsukaze takes catastrophic damage to her bow and stern, forced to limp back to Ravel at 6 knots. She'll be in dry dock for 5 months. Taylor's after-action report is clinical. Positioned 150 yards offshore. Engines idle. All noise discipline maintained. Enemy formation passed within 250 yards. Unaware of presence. Fired at point-blank range. Estimated probability of hit 80%. Target destroyed. But his personal letter to his wife reveals more. Margaret, I have to tell you what happened last night, even though the sensors will probably black it out. We sat there in the dark while 4 Japanese destroyers passed so close I could hear their crews talking on deck. My radio man was shaking so hard I thought they'd hear his teeth chattering. But we stayed silent just like Gamble taught us. And when I gave the order to fire, our torpedoes were so close they couldn't miss. For the first time since this war started, I felt like we had a fighting chance. The Japanese noticed Imperial Navy combat reports from early 1943 show increasing alarm about PT boat tactics. A captured document from the Japanese 8th Fleet headquarters dated February 4, 1943 reads, American torpedo boat tactics have changed significantly. They no longer attack from seaward in predictable patterns. They hide along coastlines in ambush positions and attack at extremely close range, making evasive maneuvers impossible. Destroyer captains are ordered to maintain increased distance from hostile shorelines and conduct systematic searchlight sweeps of coastal waters. But the most telling Japanese reaction comes from a private diary recovered after the war written by Lieutenant Commander Masayoshi Yoshimura, captain of the destroyer Amagiri. These American motorboats are no longer mere nuisances. They have become genuine threats. On the night of February 11th, we detected one hidden against Kolombangara Island at a range of less than 200 m. By the time our guns could acquire the target, it had fired torpedoes and vanished. The torpedo struck our bow, killing 12 men and nearly sinking us. I do not know how to defend against an enemy I cannot see until it is too late. This is not honorable naval warfare. This is assassination. The Marines on Guadalcanal noticed something else. They stopped starving. The Tokyo Express runs that had delivered 1,500 tons of supplies per night had dwindled to nothing by March 1943. Japanese soldiers on the island cut off from resupply began dying of malnutrition at a rate of 100 per day. By the time Operation K evacuated the survivors in February, they'd been reduced to eating grass, roots, and bark. Staff Sergeant Mitchell Page, who'd earned the Medal of Honor defending Henderson Field in October, wrote in his memoir, "We didn't know who was stopping the Tokyo Express. We just knew that by January, the nightly bombardment had stopped. The supplies stopped coming. The enemy reinforcements stopped arriving. Later, we learned it was PT boats, plywood boats smaller than my house, that had accomplished what battleships couldn't. Those boys saved our lives and they did it in boats that could be destroyed by a single shell." The kill ratios tell the story mathematically. In the 6 months before Gamble's innovation, June through November 1942, PT boats in the Solomons sank or damaged 6 Japanese vessels while losing 18 points boats. That's a loss ratio of 3 to 1 against the Americans. In the 6 months after December 1942 through May 1943, PT boats sank or damaged 42 Japanese vessels while losing 7 PT boats, a 6 to 1 ratio in favor of the Americans. Lives saved is harder to calculate, but the strategic analysts tried. The Joint Chiefs of Staff estimated that each Tokyo Express run that was turned back saved approximately 30 American casualties on Guadalcanal. Soldiers and Marines who didn't have to fight reinforced resupplied Japanese positions. By that calculation, stopping 60 Tokyo Express runs between December 1942 and February 1943 saved 1,800 American lives directly. But the indirect impact was larger. By cutting the Japanese supply line, PT boats forced the evacuation of Guadalcanal 3 months earlier than Japanese planners had expected. The RAND Corporation's post-war analysis estimated this accelerated timeline shortened the entire Solomon Islands campaign by 6 months, preventing an estimated 9,000 American casualties. For context, that's more lives saved than any single invention except perhaps penicillin. The innovation spread beyond the Solomons. By June 1943, PT squadrons in New Guinea, the Philippines, and even the Mediterranean were using ambush tactics adapted from Gamble's original technique. In the Mediterranean, PT boats, redessated MTBs, motor torpedo boats, in European waters, used similar coastal ambush methods to interdict German convoy routes between Sicily and North Africa, sinking 19 vessels in the summer of 1943. The impact of this innovation extended far beyond World War II, and we'll get to that in a moment. But first, if this story has earned your like, please hit that button. It helps more people discover these forgotten chapters of history. And if you want to support more deep dive research into unknown heroes like Lester Gamble, check out the Patreon link in the description. Now, let's talk about what happened after the war. Lieutenant Commander John F. Kennedy, who commanded PT-109 in the Solomons, later wrote in a letter to a Navy historian, "The PT boat's greatest innovation wasn't technological. It was tactical. Someone figured out that being small and wooden wasn't a liability if you used it correctly. Gamble's ambush technique turned our greatest weakness, vulnerability, into our greatest strength. We became invisible, and an invisible enemy is terrifying." The final validation came in November 1943 when Admiral Howley awarded PT Squadron 2 the Presidential Unit Citation, the highest unit honor in the U.S. military. The citation specifically mentioned innovative tactics that fundamentally altered the strategic situation in the Solomon Islands theater. But perhaps the most meaningful validation came decades later. In 1987, the National Defense University published a study of tactical innovation in warfare. The study identified 12 instances in military history where a junior officer's innovation fundamentally changed combat doctrine. Lester Gamble's PT boat ambush tactic was listed third behind Billy Mitchell's demonstration of air power against battleships and ahead of Norman Schwarzkopf's left hook at Desert Storm. The study's conclusion was simple. Sometimes the greatest tactical innovations come not from advanced technology or brilliant strategy, but from junior officers desperate enough to ignore conventional wisdom and experiment with what works. After the war, Lester Gamble did something that would seem impossible for a man who changed naval warfare. He disappeared. He turned down every interview request, declined to write a memoir, refused to attend PT boat reunions. When the Navy Department wanted to feature him in a promotional documentary about PT boat operations, Gamble sent a 1-sentence telegram, "No thank you. Other men did more." He returned to Oakland, California, resumed selling insurance, married his high school sweetheart, and raised 3 children. His neighbors had no idea he'd sunk a Japanese flagship. His insurance clients didn't know he'd helped win Guadalcanal. When his son asked him about the war, Gamble would only say, "I drove a boat. We got lucky." The full story didn't emerge until 1995 when naval historian Robert Barclay was researching his comprehensive history at close quarters PT boats in the United States Navy. Barclay tracked down Gamble, then 79 years old, and convinced him to sit for an interview. Gamble's explanation for his silence was characteristically simple. I wasn't a hero. I was desperate. We were losing. And I tried something different. It worked. That's not heroism. That's desperation plus luck. But his crewmen told a different story. In interviews, they described a commander who spent hours studying Japanese patrol patterns, who insisted on discipline when every instinct screamed to fire early and run, who put himself between his crew and danger every single night. Ensign Martin Totten, Gamble's torpedo officer, put it simply, he saved our lives by refusing to follow doctrine that was killing us. That sounds like heroism to me. The PT boat itself became obsolete after World War II, replaced by faster missile-armed patrol craft, but Gamble's core innovation, the use of coastal ambush tactics by small, fast boats against larger warships, remains in modern naval doctrine. The Israeli Navy's D-Bur-class patrol boats use similar tactics against larger vessels in coastal waters. U.S. Navy SEALs employ Gamble's principles in riverine warfare. Even China's Mosquito fleet of small attack boats draws inspiration from PT boat ambush tactics. The U.S. Navy's current doctrine manual NWP 320 surface ship operations includes an entire chapter on small craft ambush tactics in littoral environments. Though it doesn't mention Gamble by name, the principles are identical to what he pioneered in December 1942. Use coastal terrain for concealment, maintain strict noise discipline, engage at point-blank range, and use surprise to overcome superior firepower. Lester Gamble died on March 15, 2003 at age 86. His obituary in the Oakland Tribune mentioned that he served in the Navy during World War II, but said nothing about the Teruzuki, nothing about ending Tanaka's career, nothing about saving Guadalcanal. At his memorial service, a group of elderly men showed up wearing PT boat squadron jackets. They tracked the obituary and come to honor their commander one final time. One of them, former crewman Robert Mills, stood and said simply, "Because of you, we came home. Because of your idea, hundreds of us came home. You always said you weren't a hero, but you were our hero. And we never forgot." The lesson is this. Sometimes the greatest victories don't come from following the rules, but from having the courage to break them when the rules aren't working. Lester Gamble wasn't a Naval Academy graduate, wasn't a career officer, wasn't even supposed to be there. He was an insurance salesman from Oakland who looked at a losing situation and refused to accept that losing was inevitable. He proved that innovation doesn't require advanced degrees or decades of experience. It requires desperation, determination, and the willingness to try something different when everyone else says it can't be done. On a warm December night in 1942, in a plywood boat facing a steel destroyer, Lester Gamble decided that the impossible was better odds than certain defeat. And that decision changed the war.